Yeah, so, I would say the amount of time I've spent in this game, one of my favorite effects in general is Dual Phase Brave. Dual Phase Brave is one of those effects that I rarely see discussion on, but I'd also argue it's one of the most underrated effects, even though, we have all the Winter Altina talk right now because she's stupid good. But yeah, no, I'd argue it's definitely still one of the best effects we have in the game currently, even up there with stuff like null debuff and guaranteed follow-ups and like whatnot and whatever. It's definitely up there. However, whatever discussion I usually see surrounding the topic tends to revolve around the ability to quad rather than its actually valuable positive. And, ever since Winter Altina came out, she's just kind of been blowing away the competition because she's stupid good. And because of that, I definitely wanted to talk about her in general, but this has also been a topic that I rarely see people talk about, so I'm going to do that because I haven't seen anyone do it, so that's my job. But yeah, you know what? I'll just get right into it. Let's start with the intrinsic values. Because of its nature of being able to attack twice before the foe can potentially make a second attack, you could kind of think of it as like a half null follow-up in the sense, and to some extent also give yourself a free B passive. Because since it is guaranteed 2 attacks, a lot of the times on like Aether Raid's offense, there's usually an emphasis on running null follow-up because of units that guarantee follow-up attacks and even impacts, which you may run into every so often. But because of Dual Phase Brave's nature in general, it mitigates a lot of these problems, as they're always going to be attacking twice before foe can even launch a second attack if they can. Likewise, even with impacts in general, they're still going to be attacking twice, so there's no reason they ever need to run stuff like null follow-up. But likewise, because both attacks come out all at once, they can deal with threats better than other Vantage units like Young Marth and Young Sheeta, for example. Young Marth is definitely more of a outlier because of his ability to run Null Counter Disrupt with Vantage, but he's still relying on one attack as opposed to Dual Phase Brave. And while the only Dual Phase Brave unit that can run Null Counter Disrupt and Vantage at the same time is Winter Altina, I would probably still take the regular Dual Phase Brave units. You can rely more on 2 attacks rather than 1 full attack, especially now, more than ever with the 6th and 7th slot, HP inflation is going to be going up and up, which means it can be difficult to one-shot foes, especially if they're at full health. And then, I would say this is probably one of my favorite parts about it, is you can deal with threats in both phases, unlike regular Brave weapons and Ninja weapons. And I think having that flexibility means it's easier to deal with foes in general. And while you can definitely do stuff for like regular Brave and Ninja weapons for like full player phase, I think it's less reliable because less might and it can leave you prone in the enemy phase as opposed to just regular Dual Phase Brave in general. Of course, if you're running a Gale Force set, you might not run into this issue per se, but you can easily just run different weapons in general that isn't Brave or Ninja weapons. And I do think Ninja weapons do have a good amount going for them, such as like Flash and Blade Gale Force strats, but I don't think it's much beyond that, which is why I do value Dual Phase Brave way more over just regular Brave and Ninja weapons. And I guess I can't leave out quads, but those really aren't as potent as the other benefits in my opinion. It could be nice if you fail to kill in the first 2 hits, but that's a whole different issue entirely if you can't. But only 2 units can consistently quad anyway, those being Laslow and Arden, because Laslow's speed and then Arden's armor, but I wouldn't say it's much of a selling point anyway. And of course you can run stuff like Quick Riposte, but I would never recommend that over just something more consistent, because it's not worth the opportunity cost, just if you can potentially attack 4 times without dying on a second hit. And of course, I do think it's worth discussing that the amount of units that can take advantage of Dual Phase Brave in general is 8 units in a game with over 600 units. It's a very, 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 very unsaturated world, which is great because it means it's less competition. That being said though, most of them are red, so competition! But yeah, anyway, I do think IS is going to attempt to saturate the role, as we've been getting some form of Dual Phase Brave ever since the Ninja ban, really, because Ninja Laevatein came out in November. Then the month after we got Altina in December. Arden got his Dual Phase Brave weapon in January. And while we didn't get anything as of this time yet in February, Sword of Reinhardt got a refund. And I do think that each month we're going to get some form of Dual Phase Brave. For how long, I don't know. But I can tell you, ever since Laslow got his refund back in February of 2020, we got nothing else from that role itself until November. And I think as it does become more commonplace, I think it's important that each Dual Phase Brave hero can stand out from each other. And as it stands, I think a good majority of them do. And of course, we can start with Winter Altina because she's the biggest outlier. You know, because she has her distant counter preferred weapon, so she has a free A slot. Her Vantage duo skill, so that means she has a free B slot, which means she can run null counter disrupt and doesn't have to fear fire sweep weapons or skills, unlike most other Vantage units, which is massive. It's just massive in general. And because she's so crazy min-max, she becomes extremely bulky and is probably going to be really hard to take down in general. However, she definitely does have counters, and I wouldn't say she's like the most broken sword we have, but she's definitely high up there in terms of viability. Because remember, she can't get her duo skill off if there's a hindrance building, and of course that would mean they're running a duo unit, which means she can't get her Vantage up. But thankfully, because she's crazy bulky, it'll probably be harder to take her down in general, even with the building gone, so if she can eat one turn, she can be fine. But I do think that's going to be a problem when you're so min-max, you might end up eating a Dark Shrine, and even though you might be able to get rid of the res with attack res unity, that doesn't apply to area of effects because that's all based on visible, on top of the fact that your defense set is still very exposed. Of course, you can definitely alleviate the Dark Shrine thing with Mythic Altina, as she could just fortress stack, replace her weapon, refine it for like defensive res, get more sets, and she'll be able to eat those no problem. But even with those counters aside, I would definitely say she's still one of the best swords we have in the game right now. And because she's infantry, she has access to Times Pulse, which means she can Gale Force, which is pretty cool. So yeah, no, I think Winter Altina, in terms of dual phase Brave units, is definitely the best one we have. But I also think her competition has a lot more utility going for them in general. Like, for example, Laslow. Also an infantry sword, and for the longest time, he was honestly like the best one of the bunch. Like prior to Winter Altina, I would definitely say Laslow was one of the best, if not the best, dual phase Brave unit we had. And he's still really, really good. But in terms of vantaging, and this goes to like every unit too, Winter Altina just outdoes everybody. It's no competition. And even with that role mitigated, or not mitigated, even with more competition from that role, Laslow's dual phase Brave weapon is honestly one of the most unique ones we have because there's no penalties attached to it. It's a 19 might preferred weapon because the attack and defense boost he gets from it. It doesn't subtract any speed, and his base 35 attack, you slap on a 19 might preferred weapon, it skyrockets. But even aside from vantaging, because he has no speed penalty and his speed set is more than workable, he can end up ditching Vantage in general and run a Spurn tank set instead, which means he can bypass hardy-bearing weaknesses in general. And despite Winter Altina's existence anyway, he's still one of the best Vantage sweepers we have in the game. And as far as attack goes, like even beyond like no counter disrupt, Vantage, his attack set is still fairly similar. But no, in terms of vantaging, Winter Altina is just like, it's no competition. Yet, be that as it may, his ability to stack speed means he can go into other roles beyond vantaging. I will say though, it's not foolproof, because now with the recent addition of the Life and Death seal, if area of effect users can run double Life and Death and shatter through his Spurn, of course that means if they run double Life and Death, they can always get vantaged. But in terms of speed tanking, a lot of his speed is going to be coming from, even beyond the Astra Blessings from Plumeria or even Peony and Light, a lot of it's going to be invisible too because of his, if you assume you run attack speed solo, that's 6 invisible, and then you run a support or 2, that's another so-and-so invisible, and that doesn't apply on the AoE, which can be a problem, but I don't think double Life and Death is going to be all too common. if it costs Hardy in the process. And I think the only unit that's going to get away with that is Legendary Lilina because of her Hardy bearing weapon. Beyond that, I would say he's still one of the most flexible dual phase brave units we have in the game. And he can also Gale Force, but because of his three spacing, it's not going to be as easy to do as like Winter Altina or Keaton. But as a dual phase brave unit in general, I would still say he's one of the better ones we still have in the game. And then we have Sword Reinhardt, and I'll tell you this much, when he first came out, it was really cool because as far as I remember, he was the only dual phase brave unit we had in the game at the time. And then sooner or later we got Keaton, Altina, Legendary Leif, Laslow. Sword Reinhardt's ability to dual phase brave was massively crept. Even with like blessings in general, allowing him to catch up to units like Altina, he still was not only a 5-star locked unit, but he also had competition from other units that could just get more attack in general, like the Laslow. But yeah, he kind of fell off, and when his refine got announced, I was kind of wondering what they were going to do with it, because they obviously weren't going to change the base, I knew that much, but they ended up giving him an impact sword with an additional 5 attack and 5 defense and res effectively because of his conditional, inflicting -5 attack on the foe, which is great. Of course, now this means rather than Sword Reinhardt being Altina Laslow competition, he's now Eliwood competition, because you're not going to really make any use of his impact on Aether Raid's offense as much, and even with the additional attack he gets, he still doesn't out damage units like Laslow and Winter Altina. It's not even close. But that's fine, because he doesn't need to be on Aether Raid's offense, which I think is what is great. They gave him his own niche that no other unit can really replicate. Of course, because now he's a sword cav on a Aether Raid's defense meta, he has to compete with the likes of Eliwood and Kemp and Sigurd. But because of his dual phase brave nature, he honestly has better survivability. Because of his guaranteed 2 attacks, he can definitely bypass stuff like, let's say for example, Brave Edelgard's Black Eagle Rule. And I know she has she's crazy bulky, like really crazy bulky. But because of her like 80% reduction on the second hit, I mean she has an easier time surviving units like Eliwood and Sigurd. And they may mess her up a bit, but I'm pretty sure she'll have she has way better ability to survive those units as opposed to Reinhardt. Now, I have yet to test this because I don't have the means of doing it, but I would assume because both attacks come out at once and the attack deficit is barely any different, it's still weapon triangle advantage. Black Eagle Rule isn't going to go off. It only applies if he quads, which he's not going to do. He's too slow. And that's the other thing. Because he's so slow, you can effectively just run Quick Riposte or something similar to that effect that guarantees a follow-up attack, and you can still double him. However, because both attacks come out at once, and he's definitely not going to be quadding anytime soon, he can run a deflect. Because the impact nature, he takes 1 hit, and then the second hit, if he takes a second hit, 80% reduction. And at that point, he should be able to survive fairly well, but at the very least, he has way better survivability than the likes of Eliwood and Sigurd. Now, I will say, though, that the other thing separating him from the other two is that he has an enemy phase. He can't be picked off as easily, because one of the best ways of dealing with Eliwood is attacking him on the player phase, because he can't do anything on the player phase. Same thing with Sigurd, except even though he has his magic, reduction, the second attack is just gonna slaughter him. It's not even a question. With Reinhardt, though, you really can't do that as easily because he can just attack back for 2 hits, which means he's much more of a threat. I would say he's more threatening in some aspects, but in terms of consistency, you can definitely go with Eliwood still. Plus, he's also cheaper, so I mean, there's not really much of an incentive to go for Reinhardt anyway, but I will say, as it stands, he has his own niche, even amongst both dual phase brave units and sword cavalry. And I would say that's pretty great overall, just for Sword Reinhardt in general. Plus, it means I could finally use mine way more often because hit breakers, gotta love them. And then we got the big boy Arden. And initially when Arden got his refine with the dual phase brave, that was great. The refine part of it was not great though, because the initial problem with Arden in general was the fact that even though he has to stay above 50% and he could use armor skills, his combination of no speed and no res meant he was just going to get completely slaughtered by anything ranged in Aether Raids, which was a problem because at that point, any magical hit in general was going to knock him out of the 50% range. Even with all that HP inflation, there was no way he was taking more than 2 hits, which meant the attack and defense buff he got from his weapon kind of became moot. But even before that, you had other units in general that just did way more damage. Even with the effective like +4 attack he got from his weapon, it wasn't enough for him to stand out anyway. Even as an armor, because he couldn't take advantage of his armor skills all too well. However, Daddy IS decided to bless us, and they gave us a skill for armors. The saves. And wow, let me tell you right now, if it were not for this skill, I would argue he'd be the worst of the bunch. But now Arden can craft himself as a pseudo support unit on offense with mage frontliners. Like, because he's an armor and his ability to use that skill, it means he can take on any physical threat necessary, which means you don't have to invest in the disencounter for him. You don't have to give up his beef advantage. You can now run armor skills in any A passive you want, because now he can make full use of them, which is amazing. And you'll usually find it that he's going to be the best in light season more so, because now with the existence of Saros in Astra, he's the last unit you'd probably want to run there, because he's not going to do anything to Saros, not a chance in hell. That being said though, 50% of the season's better than 0%, and I will gladly take that. Overall, he's a very good unit now thanks to saves, but I would say his overall performance still lags behind in just vantaging in general. Even then, he still has his own niche, which is great, and I wouldn't have it any other way, to be honest. And then, I don't know how to feel about this one. OG Altina. And I'll just come out and say, if it were not for the fact that she's a Mythic, I'd argue she has almost no value at this point. I think being a Mythic only does so much when her competition can stack blessings and outperform her. She's still strong, all things considered, and even though Reagan has a similar, like, Astra blessing, there isn't an Astra Mythic that can soak Dark Shrines, because Plumeria has lopsided defense res. Naga doesn't really do it as well, but she may be able to. I just don't think it's as consistent. And then Reagan is way more offensive, so she's really going to be your Bright Shrine soaker anyway. But as far as dual phase Braving goes, any other unit just outperforms her at this point. Even with Rhines, the fact that she has no access to blessings is a complete detriment to her performance. And even when she first launched, I always remember the fact that she just dies to Thracias in general, so much so that if you want to prevent that, you gotta give up her seal for Deflect Magic, and that's terrible. But yes, worst comes to worst, she can still be used as a sabotage unit and a Dark Shrine soaker, which isn't a bad role in general. Even though she's so strong as a dual phase Brave unit, she's arguably the weakest of the bunch. Although, in a similar sense, you have Legendary Leif, and while he can get blessings, it's inconsistent because he's a Legendary unit, which definitely sucks. Of course, when he does get his season, he can do really well, which is awesome. I don't really like the whole Legendary thing because I think it's more of a detriment to overall playstyle than anything else. It's definitely good for arena purposes, but I wouldn't say much beyond that. Of course, if that were all there was to it, I wouldn't be talking about Leif in general, but Legendary Leif being that he's a colorless unit, and he comes with his Gale Force preferred skill, he has a lot going for him. Currently, right now, there is no competition from other units of its kind, even as a dual phase Brave unit, because unique color, way better range, and Gale Force. And while some infantry units can Gale Force, I don't think it's nearly as good as Leif's in general. On top of the fact that because of his stat allocation in general, he has a very, very strong mixed phase utility. And colorless means he's not going to be struggling with weapon type disadvantages, which means he has an easier time taking out some units. So I will say, the only downside I could really give Leif is that he's a legendary unit, because of that consistency, but overall, he's still one of the best dual phase Brave units we have in the game, and I think it's more so because of his Gale Force than anything else, because it allows him to shine on Aether Raid's defense. And then, Another unit with a unique color is Ninja Laevatein, and we got her back in November. Ninja Laevatein, in a sense, is effectively just Altina, but Laslow, which means she's already better. And the fact that she's green means she doesn't really face any competition from units of her kind, and I don't think being a flyer really does her any favors, but because of the nature of her playstyle, I don't think it matters all too much, given that you're a dual face Brave Vantage unit, so there really isn't much downside to her class outside of maybe just bows. But if you're in the Vantage range anyway, you probably don't need to run IOs anyway. On top of the fact that her dual phase Brave weapon is effectively just half Bronze Blade, which means she can stack even more attack and go from there. However, the existence of Panic is going to be a problem. Also lulls, and I think it's more going to be lulls than anything else. I don't think the Bronze Blade stuff is going to age all too well, and because there really isn't much else going for her outside of the dual phase Brave nature and rhymes, I think she might end up being more prone to power creep, because really the only niche she has going for her right now is the fact that she's green, and that's not bad. And even if a new unit comes out and ends up outperforming her, I wouldn't say she just loses all value, because she's so stupid strong. But as far as niches go, I don't think she has one in comparison, because at least Altina is a mythic, so you have stuff you can do with that. In some senses, you're also forced to run her, so I wouldn't equate the two in a sense. Even then, as a dual phase Brave unit, she's also one of the better ones we have. And then also a unit with no niche, Keaton! I will say though, being the only dual phase Brave beast in the game does have its benefits. Because for starters, because he's a beast, he has access to Wood Out, which means he can deal more damage when his special triggers, and that's not going to be hard if you run like Brave Lucina support with like a 2 cooldown special or 3 cooldown special or something. It's not going to be hard to deal more damage. And because he's a beast, he can bypass stuff like Sakei's Blessing, which I do still see quite a lot, because it's pretty good. That being said though, he still struggles against Fire Sweep in general, and because of his no speed, no res combination, he's gonna get slaughtered by anything magic. No res and no speed means you're going to get doubled and you're going to take a lot of damage. And that could be a problem when you have units in the game so that a lot of people use, like Brave Veronica or Brave Camilla. Like, saves in general are going to be a problem for him, as opposed to other units. I will say though, because of his Wood Out preferred weapon, he is able to outdamage a majority of the dual phase Brave units when his special triggers, of course, but as far as competition goes, you just have better units you can invest into. But if you like him, go for him. He's definitely not bad by any means. But also similar to Winter Altina, he can Gale Force with Time's Pulse, which is super nice. But I will say though that because it really doesn't help that he's just a red unit, and even as a beast, he still faces competition from the likes of Winter Altina and Laslow, and that's a problem. But no, overall as a dual phase Brave unit, he's still one of the better ones we have. And also, I think those were all the ones that we have. And if I had to rank them in the order I think, like from best to worst, it kind of gets weird because just on the comparison side, most of them do their own unique thing, so it's really hard to compare. But if I had to put it in my totally subjective tier rank system thingy-majiggy, I'd probably put Winter Altina at the top as number 1, probably Legendary Leif and Laslow at 2, and then Arden and Sword Reinhardt at 3, then Ninja Laevatein and Keaton at 4, and then Altina at 5. And it isn't to say the ones at 3, 4, and 5 are bad, because they aren't bad. In fact, they're all really good. But compared to the rest, I'd probably say they're worse than the others. But even then, it's still currently a very undersaturated role. But given the pattern that IS has been using for the past 4 months, I can probably see more coming soon. And if we do end up getting more soon, they're going to need their own niche, because like if they enter the fray as another Keaton or a Ninja Laevatein, it only means so much until like newer units get into the game with even more stats or better preferred weapons. But no, honestly, I would like to hear what you guys think on this, because honestly, I think Dual Phase Brave is one of the most underrated effects we have in the game right now, but I also think it has some of the most potential in comparison to everything else. But yeah, do you agree? Do you not agree? Am I wrong? Are you wrong? I don't know. Tell me. If you would like more discussions like this, let me know. Also, I've been seeing this on YouTube lately where people would like put out a keyword at the end of their video to show that they actually watched it. So our keyword is going to be, here, let me look around my room. It's going to be mechanical pencil. That's not one word, that's 2 words. Alright, that's the key phrase. Mechanical pencil. Now tell me if you actually watched it. I want to see if this actually works. But yeah, no. If you guys want more discussions like that, let me know. If you have any specific topics, let me know. I would love to cover them. But yeah, until then, it's a never-ending cycle of gotcha.